Kia koutou whānau, welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News with our big hairy guest, Shane Tapo. Kia ora, Shane.
Kia ora. Great to be on.
I was just thinking, actually, you know, Snapchat and all these places have filters, right? You can put filters on things. I was wondering maybe we should get a beard filter. And so then when we get a guest on, we can put the beard filter on.
After the lockdown, like most folks, I had a great beard.
Yep.
And sort of stylized it up, and but I just got a bit. I didn't let it just grow full like you did. I sort of had it manicured, and I just found it too hard to manage. And one day I just got rid of it. But I miss my beard, especially on cold Makariri nights like it is here in Auckland. And and there was a bit of a beard fad after lockdown. But I think things come and go, and I wonder whether the beards have done their thing again, and I just see more and more people that I knew that grew beards are now clean shaven. I'm not sure.
I think you're right though. There was a bunch of people who work in offices and businesses, and normally have to be clean shaven. They were then inside for 4 or 5 months or whatever it was, and they took the opportunity to grow out the beard. No, I've been growing mine though for about 4.5 or 5 years, so I'm pre-lockdown, but. There you go. Hey, do you want to just let people know, I don't mean this in like a patronising way, but kind of who you are and what you do, and then we can get onto the show with you as our guest Beardie.
Yeah, no, that'll be great. Hey, look, I was born and bred in the Eastern Bay of Plenty, and that's really where my political roots began. I was brought up in a mill town called Kawerau. My father was a staunch unionist, not by design, just by the mere fact that he worked there for 30-odd years, and that collective strength was very important. It was a very militant union. I can remember 2 lengthy strikes, 6 weeks plus. And from there, my sort of interest grew in the Labour movement. I was active in the Labour Party. In 1984 was the first sort of campaign I got involved in, and of course that was when David Lange and the Lange Revolution sort of took over, and got involved in a campaign by a candidate called Anne Fraser was the name at the time, who won the seat. It was a huge movement. Muldoon called the snap election, and Labour won a swathe of seats, including the East Cape, which is now basically morphed into the East Coast.
Was that snap election the famous quote, "Not very long for my opponent to get ready for"? He basically called a snap election on a night he was pissed. That's
right. When he was pissed, they called it very simple, snap election. Yeah, I got involved in that, and then
snap election. I've never heard that.
And the other famous story from that night, apparently Muldoon was really pissed and he wanted to drive home, and some of his people physically let the air down in his tire, so he couldn't drive off. Around 84, I got involved in the Labour Party, and then I moved up to Tamaki Makaurau, and I've become very active, particularly in the anti-apartheid movement, the Māori sovereignty movement. This is how way back I go. I go back to the day where our catch cry was, "The treaty is a fraud." Oh. Yeah, that's what but then it sort of morphed in that it was made fraudulent and honour the treaty. And become involved in trade union issues, and then worked there for quite some time, and very active in the Labour Party. And to cut a long story short, about 4 or 5 years now, I was listening to, I was reading something, and then I was, I love politics, so I was listening to Talkback, and then they had a panelist on, and I thought to myself, I reckon I could do that. So I just wrote a column. I forget what it was about sorry, the name, to Newsweek. No, sorry, what's the Newsroom? To Newsroom. Sorry about that.
Gotcha.
To Newsroom, and they published it. And two into it, I rang the producer of ZB, Heather Duplessis Allen show, and I said, "Can you give me a crack?" And they said, "Yeah, we'll give you a crack." And I went into the studio and did an 8-minute slot, and then become quite a regular guest of hers.
Yep.
And then just got asked to do more and more stuff, and then over the last 2.5 years, I've been a regular columnist in the New Zealand Herald, which is an interesting gig in itself because it's a lonely space. I'm not sure whether you, Pat, or your viewers read the New Zealand Herald, but I reckon in terms of left versus right columnist, I'm outnumbered by about 6 to 7 to 1.
Yeah, no, because we have
There's not many of us on the left.
Yeah, Simon Wilson's a good friend of the show, as they say.
Oh, Simon's a good dude.
Yeah, and it seems to be like that, doesn't it? It seems to be a fairly, shall we say, right-leaning publication. I do check it out. I mean, I'm in Dunedin now, so our local is the ODT, but because we do research for this, I kind of look at everything, but only really online. Yeah.
Oh, no. It's just like talkback. I suppose there's more interest and more viewership from the centre-right sort of spectrum, but I've got to say my editors always been good to me. They've never tried to muzzle me or give me some direction. I've had very small edits, mainly over a point of fact rather than my opinion. So I think they've given me a fair go.
It's that famous Howard Stern example. Howard Stern was a young radio jock doing a drive show, and he started to outrate the breakfast show. And that wasn't supposed to happen. The breakfast show was supposed to always be the biggest, and there was like a 50, 60-year-old doing the breakfast show, had been doing it forever, and this young upstart doing the drive show started outrating them. And they polled his audience. They did research on Howard Stern's audience, and half of them said, "I love him, and I want to know what he's going to say next." And half of them said, "I hate him, and I want to know what he's going to say next." And so that's in the media, something to think about. That when you, I think. New Zealand's so small, you don't really get a microcosm of evenly spread commentary. Yes. I think what the media in New Zealand actually misses is I know you're servicing an audience that might be, let's say, a centre-right audience, but actually having some left or even progressive left opinions and stuff on there from a core would actually probably drive as much, if not more, traffic. Because even if the listener hates them, they'll stick around because they want to know what they're going to say next.
That's right. And, we've just had we've just had the latest radio surveys, and ZB rules supreme again, but really quite interesting, actually, when you break down the numbers. Although he does rate supreme, people are turning off that type of radio, and they're heading for safe ground, which is often sort of middle of the road music stations. So
I also think Today FM made a mistake. Today FM tried to compete with ZB. They should have actually hired progressive left-wing hosts and actually gone, let's go after an audience that isn't being currently sought. It may still not have worked, but to try and compete with the monolith, it's just not going to work ever. Anyway.
Oh, and also they didn't give it long enough.
Yeah.
I thought that Tova was a good buy.
Yeah, I think so too.
I thought Duncan. Probably I get on okay with Duncan, but he's probably seen his better days as a broadcaster or a journalist. But they had a pretty weak drive time show, and you got to build your audience, and I just think if they had given a little bit more time. But interestingly enough, when I go into those studios, because people might not realise that they're not sort of standalone studios. They're in Media Weeks here, you would have Today FM, and you got George FM, and you got The Rock, and I think Flavour.
Yep.
And when you talk to some of those folks that work in the other other sort of radio stations, but live in the same building, they get a bit pissed off with the talkback, because they say that their listenership is quite small, but they're quite expensive to run.
But because you can't just put on like I used to work in music radio.
Yeah.
We've already gone off on lots of tangents, which is great. I used to work in music radio, and of course you don't need it. You don't need someone to man the station overnight.
There's
a computer that does it, and someone that records voice breaks in 20 minutes. Whereas a talkback station there is no no opportunity for someone to be away. Typically, you need at least 2 full-time staff all the time.
That's right.
Not always. When I used to do ZB overnights, I didn't have a producer, but typically now you have to have at least a producer and at least a host 24/7. But the music station, that's not necessary. So it costs more. And Today FM wasn't rating. They'd be saying the opposite at NZME though, because ZB is the big boy there.
Absolutely.
And so the music stations won't be complaining about that because ZB is the. I mean, I know that I've worked as a marketing, giving advice on marketing, and I've done advertising with all the brands. And there's basically a list of prices for NZME, and then there's a list of prices for Newstalk ZB. Yeah. So that's how different it is. They said it us.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. All right.
Hey, let's talk about things tonight. Yeah. First thing we're going to do though, Shane, and we do this most nights, to say huge thanks to our patrons. Love you guys to bits. You come on board and help us, pay some bills and do a few bits and pieces. If you're interested in what we do, if you're a bit of a lurker tonight and you haven't, headroom.com/Big Hero News and support us that way. There's lots of other ways you can support us. So you can, as it says on the bottom of the screen right now, if you are watching this rather than listening to it, you can subscribe to our daily audio podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Just search for #BHN or Big Hero News. This show will become an audio podcast after the show. Maybe you're driving to work tomorrow morning and you want to listen to the end of the show because you're going to bed early. You can listen to us on the audio podcast.
Nice.
Beautiful, simple, easy, Shane, easy. Hey, what's not quite so easy is to try and figure out messaging from politicians. Let's start with some of that, shall we?
Sure.
This is actually an article, and he's not asleep, Mr. Luxon. Well, he might be asleep at the wheel after today's comments, but there's not a picture of him being asleep. We're not doing a Joe Biden on him where he falls asleep in a meeting. But this is actually from an interview 2 days ago. We played some of this interview yesterday, but I didn't play this part of it. This part of it is Christopher Luxon warning New Zealand about why not to vote for the left, which has pretty much been the narrative of Christopher Luxon for the past 12 months. But he says something quite interesting that the host then does not pick up on, and I wanted to talk to you about it. Let me just play this audio and video first from Christopher Luxon, then let's have a chat.
I think what is incredibly worrying is that you've got Te Pāti Māori, the Greens, and many members of the Labour Party saying they want it. You've got Chris Hipkins saying he's not going to do it. But let's be clear, after the election, he will bend to the will of the Te Pāti Māori and the Greens. And I just
you don't
think
know that, though, do you?
Incredibly destructive. Well,
you
let's
don't
be
know
clear.
that that's what would happen.
Well, we do in a coalition of chaos. You cannot tell me that Chris Hipkins is not going to want to form a government with the Greens and Te Pāti Māori. Central policy for them is a wealth tax. That's destructive for New Zealand. Puts a wrecking ball through the economy.
Dangerous line to be going on about a coalition of chaos when we're not quite sure what's going on with who you would partner up with.
And remember, this was 2 days ago, let alone what's happened today. But we'll keep going.
On their policies, there is time still with 52 days to go to clarify some of these.
Well, I'll be really clear, and I think the choice is incredibly stark to New Zealanders. It's just more of the same with a coalition of chaos, or it's a strong, stable, national-led government. And what we're saying very clearly to New Zealanders is if you want a guaranteed change to the government, there's only one thing to do, and that is to party vote national.
There you go. So we've given them the party political broadcast there, Shane. The thing I found really interesting about that particular little snippet was when he was talking about bending to the will of Te Pāti Māori and the Greens. So the warning to New Zealand from Christopher Luxon is, careful New Zealand, that those two parties will take Labour further left. Although Te Pāti Māori is not further left, but there'll be things that Te Pāti Māori want and the Greens will take them further left. Now, Anna Burns France has missed this. The most obvious question that should have been asked that is, hang on, Mr. Luxon, if New Zealand should be worried about the Greens and Te Pāti Māori causing Labour to bend to their will, shouldn't we be worried that National will have to bend to the will of ACT and New Zealand First? Now, that question was never asked. I think that's the most interesting part about what that conversation could have been. So they didn't do it, so I think we should. So what do you think? Yeah. Do you think that there's equal danger from both sides? Is one more dangerous than the other? What are your thoughts?
Look, I think that the biggest danger to the National Party itself is a rampant act that National is absolutely reliant on to take the Treasury benches. They want austerity. Now, and we're talking about deep dive austerity, some that we have not seen since Rogernomics and euthanasia. They can talk about cuts in terms of spending and $1 billion.
$1 billion on day one is what ACT wants.
But low hanging fruit. they can do low-hanging fruit about, someone puts on a function that costs $40,000 or even a spend of $5 or $6 million. The reality is that most of the money in terms of government expenditure is spent on welfare.
Yep.
And a large lump of that actually is superannuation.
Yep, retirees,
right?
100%.
Yes. Then you've got health and you've got education.
Yep, they're the three big
So
ones.
the reality is for ACT to save the type of money that they're talking about and balance the books and give tax cuts, the only way they can do that is to gut that spending, and the first folks to bleat in terms of my predictions will be middle national voters, because they will feel the hurt and they will feel the pain. So I think that it's a huge danger to the National Party, and I don't think that Luxon has quite realised that. He does have a little bit of insurance, and the insurance is Winston Peters at 5%, because Winston, look, he talks a big game when he's in opposition, and there's been a lot of stuff that my good friend Shane Jones is talking about that has really quite upset me, and I don't think he believes half the shit he's talking about, by the way. But that's his insurance, because Winston is a bulldog on the Huskings, but a bit of a poodle once he gets to government. But I just think that if the National Party is reliant on ACT to form a coalition government, we're going to see austerity, and we're going to see neoliberal economics greater than we saw under Ruth and Asia, and greater than we saw under Rogernomics. Because here is the thing: David Seymour was an absolute ideologue. He's held a consistent policy position from first day he arrived in Parliament. He hasn't got involved in the peripheral issues apart from race baiting. He stuck to his neoliberal lines, and he will want to deliver it absolutely. He's not going to put up with 5 or 6 charter schools. He will want core changes in public spending and tax breaks or tax cuts.
Lots of chat in the chat, as you would expect. National will bend to the will of ACT then, says JK. Brett says Hipkins should bend now into a capital gains tax. National bends to the knee of millionaires. Guru says the coalition of Chris Chaos. Gary says National Act equals a coagulation of carcass. That's quite clever. I quite like that one. And then this one, the coalition of cookers. Now, this came up last week. Cookers meaning conspiracy theorists.
Yes.
Even today, there was a new photo that came out of an ACT candidate, Felix Poole, which is this guy here, from Mangakiki, holding up a "Don't Tread on Me," which is the Texas sort of, it has a lot of connotations to it sign. Yeah. And so these people are here, and they're in there, following on from having to bend the knee to ACT or New Zealand First. Two things, right? The first thing is New Zealand First only comes into the equation if first they get there, and I'm not convinced of that. And second is if National needs them. So in other words, if it can be National and ACT without New Zealand First, then New Zealand First becomes irrelevant, because nothing can get passed without them. So even if it was National and ACT up to 59 seats, then there's not enough to get anything passed anyway. So that's more of a comment. The second thing is, what do you think about all? I mean, I know you wouldn't have been surprised. Like it's the most unsurprising headline of the week award goes to, but the ACT Party, not only being this austerity threat that you're talking about, but also being full of conspiracy theorists and, I'll use the word nut bars in a colloquial kind of way. What are your thoughts?
Oh, look, I'm not surprised. And you don't have to dig very deep to find folks of a similar view in terms of New Zealand First. And, Winston played that card early when he went to the protest in Wellington and has grown that. And he's he's been consistent throughout the years in terms of being able to feel a slight pulse or that gets them that 5 to 6% mark. And I think as we get closer to the election, we'll flush more of these folks out.
Do you think it matters? Because I haven't seen anyone inside the top 15. Let's say ACT brings 15 people in. The people that they seem to be finding out about, like number 48 on the list. Do you think it matters? Or is it, because the way I thought about it yesterday, Shane, was it doesn't even feel like so much it's about who the candidates are. What matters is this is actually the constituency. These are the people that are going to vote for ACT. So even if you don't have a Voices for Freedom person in the caucus, you've got lots of them who have voted for you, who then would have expectations of what they want you to do.
Absolutely. And look, we just have to see who is turning up regularly to National Party meetings. And, you know, earlier on this year, they purposefully held their meetings at 11 o'clock a.m. on a Thursday at Hawakere and Tamaki or Northcote, because they knew that they were going to get the sort of the baby boomers and above,
the Blue Rinse Brigade.
The Blue Rinse Brigade along. And most of the kōrero at those type of meetings are not about economic direction. It's not about how we manage our tax intake. It's about Maoris having too much say. It's about flaming around issues of co-governance, and they've built that support in and around the peripheral. And the thing about building your support around the peripheral, it doesn't tend to hold long. You lose them as quick as you grab them, particularly when you are in government and you know the reality, or you're cast upon with the reality. You're not able to deliver for those folks.
Speaking of meetings, of course, and I think I saw you commenting on this on Twitter today. There was a meeting, I think, today by the ACT leader who made the claim. I always, when someone makes a claim, Shane, I always go, what's your metric for that claim? How do you measure that? But the claim that was made today, for people who don't know, by Mr. Seymour, was if Nelson Mandela was alive today, he would be campaigning for ACT. This is what the leader said. Launching his 45-minute talk at the Motari Hills Community Centre on Thursday, Seymour told the 250-strong crowd he'd listened to people across the length of the country, and 2/3 of New Zealanders are annoyed. He probably didn't break down what they're annoyed with, because I wonder if 2/3 of those 2/3 are annoyed with them. But, you know, I mean, he's going to come out and he's going to go, I was joking, or I was this, or I was that. But I mean, I almost find it offensive. He would even float the idea that Nelson Mandela would vote for ACT.
Nelson Mandela was a Marxist. Read the Freedom Charter, which I cut and paste. He believed in ownership of the means of production, minerals, etc. And let me tell you something, Pat. If this was 1981 and Seymour was around, he would not be a supporter of Nelson Mandela. He would have been on the other side of the barriers that, in terms of the ones that I faced, or the battens that I faced from the police. He would have been pro-apartheid. He would have said sports and politics don't mix. He would have said that it's none of our business. And he certainly wouldn't have supported the end of apartheid through economic sanctions. He's just rewriting history, and we know it's bullshit.
Yeah.
And also because it has so little credibility, he makes himself look stupid.
Yeah, and that comes through pretty clearly from people who think, oh, for fuck's sake, says Free Soul. Mr. Anderson says 45 minutes, oh, the humanity. Did not see that claim. Wow, he's unhinged. Nelson Mandela, when he was alive, was a member of South African Communist Party, the ANC. And then someone else thinks, maybe it's comedy. I mean, we've heard in the last few weeks how much Seymour thinks he has a, what did he say? An advanced sense of humor, but anyway, I don't know.
But you know, Pat, I don't think we should underrate him as a politician. You know, let's just take it back. ACT was all but dead. They had some very unusual people in charge for a little while. That where remember where the discussion was around incest. and that it wasn't that bad, and they had peripheral sort of leaders, and he has built up some momentum, and I think it's quite possible that he could get up to 15-16%. And that's going to be, as I said at the top of the show, going to pose some real threats to the National Party, and who tend to govern from the middle. This is not going to be, Chris Hipkins is right, this is not going to be a government, or if it does occur, this is not going to be a government of English or Ki or even Bolger. This will be unlike any other right coalition we've seen in Aotearoa.
I wonder if the National Party, the mothership, are thinking about how they gifted him Epsom, because that's the reason he's still there today. And I also wonder, playing the political game, I've always been annoyed that the right seem to play politics better than the left, because if the left had got their A into G and had come together and all voted for example, for Goldsmith, then he would have gotten more votes. If you count the number of votes for Labour, for the Labour candidate and the Greens candidate in Epsom, and if all of those people had voted for the National candidate, he wouldn't have been there. He wouldn't have got in. But the left don't seem to know how to do it. And just to echo your points, this is something I did a couple of weeks ago, and my people have seen this. But just to show you, I went through all the polls for the last 4 years. I like numbers, Shane. So this is my little graph of all the polls for the last 4 years between One News Hub, and Roy Morgan. We were looking for trends. And in 2011, ACT got 1.1%. In 2014, they got 0.7. In 2017, they got 0.5, and then in 2020 they got 7.6. So you're right. You can't argue where his message and their direction has brought them back from, because from 0.5 2 elections ago to perhaps 12-15% is unbelievable. Does it say more about ACT, or does it say more about who National are and how anti the left society feels at the moment? Not sure, but whichever the answer is, it's done a lot for them.
What hasn't changed a heck of a lot is the left and right block. If we put the last poll to aside, and we did the calculations in terms of, let's say, ACT. Let's, for the sake of this argument, put New Zealand First and the National Party, and then we had the Greens, and we had Te Pāti Māori, and we had Labour. We're only talking about 25,000-30,000 votes between them, which isn't a heck of a lot. And I wondered whether Aotearoa is becoming a country that has fewer swing votes. And the USA is a prime example. There are very few purple states now. They're either Republican or Democrats. And I wonder whether or not that politics is becoming more tribal in terms of New Zealand, and it'd be interesting to see how that develops over the next little while. I think one of the problems that the right will have is demographics, and the reality is, I think that younger people are more liberal and also more concerned about, and rightfully so, more concerned about green issues.
I believe this is the first election that the boomers have been a minority. The boomers and wartime babies, and Gen X, Y, and Z are the majority now. So what that means on election day, I'm not sure.
Can I say this though?
Yeah.
If I at this point in time, if I wanted a block of voters, it'll be the boomers at this point in time, because they get out and vote.
Absolutely.
And I think that one of the problems the left is going to be faced, as we did in 2008, is people just simply staying home and not turning up. Apathy. And no. People say apathy. I don't think so. I think that that the policy grouping that Labour's put together has been too timid. I think if there was some form or shape of wealth tax, whether it be a speculation tax on land banking, or perhaps some movement in terms of ghost housing, or some form of capital gains tax, I think that would have motivated people to get out to vote. But I just don't think reducing GST or getting rid of GST on fruit, vegetables, and increasing paternity leave by 4 weeks. I just don't think it's motivational enough to get people out to vote. I don't think it's apathy. I think it's more about, well, there's certainly not a movement to make my life any better in a meaningful way.
We've got some merchandise we've been selling here, Shane, and
Nice.
it's a saying that we've been saying for the last 6 months, and it's, if the left vote, the left wins. Because
Yes.
I think in all Western countries there are more left voters than right, but the right, as you say, are more active. So we'll send you a T-shirt with "If the left vote, the left wins" on it, and we'll help.
And we saw a prime example of that in 2005. Just quickly tell the story. I was running Dover Samuels and JT's sort of campaign.
Mm-hmm.
We were in Alexandra Park on one floor. We actually lost those 2 seats. Above us was the National Party, and they were hollering, and this was when Brash was the leader. They were hollering, and the champagne corks were popping. And we knew that some of those big booths, particularly in Mangere, what we called the 3 M's, Mangere, Manirewa, and Manukau East, hadn't come in. Yeah. And we won the election. The Labour won the election based on those 3 seats. I'm not sure we're going to see the level of turnout in 2023 in seats like that to get the left over the top.
So that kind of rolls us into another conversation here, and Ciara has just pointed out that Greens policy would make my life better in a tangible way. So that leads me into the second conversation, or the second part of this conversation. This was an article written by Simon Wilson a couple of months ago. Nationals Christopher Luxon is fighting for the party's future. The battleground is race. There's one thing that Simon said in this article, and I'll just scroll down to it and read it out. It says this: meanwhile, National has not pulled itself into the commanding position Luxon's supporters expected, which he still hasn't done. If ACT wins, say, 20% and National 30%, ACT will be a powerful force in the new government. So powerful, it will be well placed to become the dominant party on the right in 2026. Too much? The hard right has taken over the Republican Party in America and replaced moderate parties of the centre-right in France, Italy, Austria, Sweden, and many other European countries. There's no reason to think the same trend won't emerge here. Now, we talked about that with Simon when that came out a couple of months ago. But my question is, seeing everyone's talking about the Greens, being the bold ones, being the brave ones, being perhaps the voice of the left now, the Greens are currently polling about what ACT is polling. Similar, 12, 13, 12, 11, so between 11 and 14. Yep. On the left, the partner to the Greens, Labour, is not polling as well as the partner to the ACT party. No. So can we also throw out the idea that at 2026, the Greens could be the dominant, powerful force on the left, much like Simon is meandering whether the ACT could be on the right? Is there a like for like there? You talked about, the partisan or the tribalness that we are. Are we going to go more tribal, and will the Greens become dominant on the left and Labour will be the supporting party? Will ACT become dominant on the right, and will National be the supporting party within the next few cycles?
I don't think so, actually. And I think the Green movement, if we have a look at it internationally, has been a failure. Where they've got some traction, particularly in Europe, is where they've been like centre-right in terms of economics and some green issues. They're almost non-existent in Australia now. Mm-hmm. The highest they've ever polled is 11%, and they simply don't get enough traction in seats that you would call heartland Labour. They get, even they've got a very good candidate running out in what used to be called Manukau East, Panmure or Tahu in terms of Efisa Collins. I don't think they're going to do any real damage to Labour. They're more active in the Māori in the Māori seats. Got some great candidates. I want to tell you that I facilitated the debate for Te Tai Tokerau, and Huana Linden is an exceptional speaker. She's got great presence and also got good, very good understanding and articulates very well in terms of policy. But I just haven't seen the Greens get enough traction in heartland Labour seats to make a big difference. The sad reality
when you say heartland,
yeah.
I think mainstream. And just on that point, there's some texts that are coming in as well. Simon says the Green Party have fundamental issues where they cannot become the dominant party of the left, say foreign policy, which would be a certified mainstream New Zealand and defence. Simon also says the leadership roles would not be seen as mainstream enough for heartland New Zealand, mainstream New Zealand. That's probably fair then.
Yeah, but they get more votes at Epsom than they do in Manukau East. You know, they get more. You know, so that is a dilemma for the Greens, and Marama's a good leader, James is a good leader, but they really haven't had an identifiable sort of strong leader that has worked over a couple of election cycles. That gets ongoing traction.
It's got to be Chloe. I mean, we Chewy refers to Chloe as his queen. So with respect to the queen, because she is so smart. We love watching interviews that she does, because she comes in and she sits next to Brooke Van Velden on TV and she goes, well, this morning I was just reading the latest research, and we go, because she comes with the receipts, you know, she comes absolutely prepared.
She's
However,
smart.
But maybe she's able to do that because she's not the leader. This is what we think. Like, because she's got time and space to be Chloe rather than having to be the leader and then maybe have other responsibilities. But she is bold and strong and don't take no shit and knows her stuff. She could be that leader.
She could be. I wonder whether she wants to stick around in Parliament long enough to see that through. She's got the goods. I think she does, and she's one of those people that when you see her up close and personal, she tends to win you over. But you know, the Greens by and large are just haven't got the level of traction, ongoing traction. I hope I'm wrong. Look, I voted Greens for the first time at the last election because I think. I think the climate crisis is the most dominating issue of our generation, and certainly my kids' generation. They are consistent when it comes to to deal with climate mitigation and leading the way on this very fundamentally important issue.
And they always come costed. You know, Labour or National will go out and talk about more prisoners in prison or less prisoners or spending money, and the reporter will go, how much does it cost to keep a prisoner? And they're out by $100,000. The Greens come costed. So whether you like the Greens, dislike the Greens, respect the Greens, don't whatever, you can't actually challenge that in this current cycle, they have been the ones who, for every policy they've put out there, they've also gone, and this is how we pay for it, which none of the other parties have done, not to that level.
No, they've got the first, second and third line in terms of dollar line well researched. And also a lot of the issues that were sort of were not extremes but on the peripheral are now central and have been proven that it was the right policy to take up, and one of them is EVs. More EVs are being bought. The technology is improving on a day-to-day basis because of the quantum that are being used, and we're not that far away from the consumer deciding that move away from traditional combustion engines to EVs. So, some of their policies that we're seeing on the peripheral are now sort of mainstream.
Yeah, completely. And we did a debate, not in this show. I do another show occasionally called Elephant TV. We did a debate about housing, and we talked to Julianne Genter, and we actually used a Greens policy as our moot, which was affordable quality housing is a right. And I said to Julianne, like, what if it's affordable but it's not quality? Or what if it's quality but not affordable, which might be more to the point? How do you do that? And she kind of said, I am paraphrasing, people can go look at the debate themselves to get the exact, but she kind of said, well, what we do is we set up a target we want to get to. And she kind of acknowledged that might take, maybe like the EVs, a decade, 15, 20 years to get there, but they start with that, like our show, the big, hairy, audacious goal to get there. And that's what they put out as their yardstick to see how close they can get today versus tomorrow versus the next day. So they're aspirational and they're forward thinking, which again, you could say many of the other parties aren't.
And they are a movement. They are a movement. They have got ongoing grassroots organisation that, say, for instance, the New Zealand First don't. New Zealand First is Winston and a few folks who come and go, but the Greens have an ongoing movement, an ongoing structure, and an ongoing kaupapa, and that's been a level of in political insurance for them.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, there's lots of people. We've got a huge number of people who are just loving Chloe. Nikki, love Chloe, much respect. She's bright. Nikki also says possible future Prime Minister. Henry, the paleo guy, she may not want to though. I guess that means being leader, which would be unfortunate. Super talented. JK says vote Greens while the planet is still livable enough to vote. As the younger demographic realises the basket case they are inheriting, the Greens will rise, which I think is probably at least a fair assertion. We'll have to wait and see.
Pat, can I tell your listeners and your viewers, Huana Linden, she's the Te Tokoro candidate. I think she's number 9 or 2 on the list. Watch this space, my friend. Okay. Watch this space.
All right. Good to see. Let's have a look now at what is arguably the biggest news story in New Zealand today. And this is, of course, a National MP found in contempt of Parliament over, quote, threatening, end quote, behaviour, but he will not be sacked. Article here from 3 News. Let's have a bit of a look. I'm going to stop halfway through and then I'm going to finish up because Jenna Lynch, we give Jenna Lynch a little bit of stick here sometimes, which may or may not be fair. But we think if you are receiving money into your joint account from your husband from the ACT Party, there might be a little bit of, just at least questionable. But she seems very good and capable of taking down Labour and also National. She's not that hard on ACT very often, but I say in this article, she's pretty accurate. I think it's quite a good commentary at the end. But we'll do the story first, then we'll have a chat, and then we'll play her commentary, which is the part of the same story. So if you haven't seen this yet, of course everyone's seen this. But let's have a look at the big news story from the day in politics.
Well, National MP Tim van der Molen has been censured by Parliament and stripped of all his portfolios after the Privileges Committee ruled he'd acted in a threatening manner toward Labour MP Shannon Halbert.
The committee found him in contempt of Parliament, but Christopher Luxon says that's not a sackable offence. Political editor Jenna Lynch reports.
A forced sorry.
I'd like to extend an apology to all members of this House.
National MP Tim van der Molen found in contempt of Parliament and forced to apologise for his inappropriate behaviour in a parliamentary select committee.
I'm horrified at the thought of my conduct having been perceived as threatening.
But that's exactly how people felt. The Privileges Committee was tasked with investigating a dust-up between Tim van der Molen and Shannon Halbert.
I certainly did feel threatened. At the time I was seated and Tim was standing.
The committee found van der Molen had stood less than a metre from Halbert in a threatening manner and ordered Halbert to stand up, mate.
Certainly there's no place for that sort of behaviour, for threatening behaviour or intimidation in Parliament.
The Privileges Committee ruled van der Molen's behaviour was aggressive in the sense of being hostile, unprofessional and with an element that was objectively threatening, but not in the sense of physical violence. The report said the behaviour cannot be condoned as normal or acceptable.
Are you harbouring a bully in your caucus?
Absolutely not. And I'd point you to the report and its findings where it describes the behaviour as aggressive, threatening, unprofessional.
I'd like to hear Mr. Luxon's definition of what a bully is. Threatening.
Exactly.
Like what he's basically saying is they said he wasn't physical, so he's not a bully. Mr. Luxon is basically saying that to be a bully, you have to be physical. I don't know about that.
Acceptable.
I don't know.
Labour's Rachel Boyack witnessed the altercation and was the MP who made the complaint.
Tim was very aggressive.
You thought you were going to witness an assault?
I was concerned that was where things could go, yes. Wow. Parliamentary staff were so concerned that they nearly called the security button.
She says Labour tried to sort it out directly.
Christopher Luxon in particular didn't take the matter seriously.
We did take it incredibly seriously.
He's been very quick to criticise other politicians' behaviour. He needs to look at his own.
Being found in contempt of Parliament is the most serious judgment an MP can receive.
So are you fit to be an MP?
Yes, I believe so.
In my view, it doesn't meet the threshold for sacking Tim out of Parliament. What it meets the threshold for is actually proportionate and appropriate response and some pretty severe consequences for him.
How is contempt of Parliament not a sackable offence for you?
What I'm saying to you is that I think it's not a sackable offence.
van der Molen says his last year has been difficult.
Sure, I've had a difficult time. Losing my sister and breaking my neck, back and arms is difficult for anyone to go through, but that's no excuse.
No excuse for threatening your colleagues.
Right, we'll pause it just there because after that, Jenna goes into some commentary, which is quite astute, quite good about the history here. Let me just bring over my Twitter feed quite carefully. This is what I tweeted out quite soon after it happened. So literally 1 month ago today, it was the 24th of the 7th, right? The Kiri Allan situation. So it's literally 1 month ago today. Christopher Luxon said this on Kiri Allan. Clearly, the situation raises questions about the judgment of Prime Minister Chris Hipkins. Now, I'm drawing that parallel because most people seem to acknowledge who are in the know that Kiri has had a hell of a year, a difficult year, yada, yada, yada. Like she's had lots of personal problems. And his response was, it shows how shit the Prime Minister is. His response today was that Tim van der Molen has had a difficult year personally over the last year. And as you can see, I don't have a big Twitter following, but that's had nearly 8,000 views, and it's you know it's doing the rounds. And that was my initial thing. There is more information about the hypocrisy between Luxon today and Luxon a month ago, which Jenna Lynch is actually going to kind of yardstick for us. But before we go there, Shane, love to get your thoughts.
Look, Tim has built a persona up of Moncho. Correct me if I'm wrong. Ex-serviceman, talks about it all the time. And I think one of the things I saw so far is they describe what happened between Tim and Shannon as a dust-up. There was no dust-up. The guy was being physically threatening towards Shannon. He was simply doing his job. The other thing is that, if I can offer a small defence of Luxon, you can't really sack him even if he wanted to. Could probably remove him from caucus, but he's a member of Parliament that's elected in his own right. But what Luxon could have done is been more condemning in this language, and certainly not try to qualify it as he did today. And just had a greater level of accountability in what you're talking about, Pat, which is absolutely right, consistency. But that is one of the problems that Luxon has. I believe that the fundamental problem with Luxon, he doesn't have a political bearing or core beliefs, and so he fundamentally makes up shit as he goes along.
And also, he goes like this. Where's that wind blowing? Because this is the thing, when people talk about, I'm glad he's a politician, not a politician, he's a businessman. I don't want to pop this bubble for you folks, but you don't run a country like you run a fucking business. A business's primary objective is to return a profit to its shareholders or its owner. That's not the objective of a country. So I'm not saying a good businessman can't be a good politician, but it's not the criteria of success that everyone seems to think it is, because they're completely different skill sets.
And look, Air New Zealand is a very different beast than most other businesses, because at the end of the day, it's supported and propped up by who? The taxpayer, and has been bowed out on more than one occasion. No doubt in the future will be bowed again by guess who? The taxpayer. But you are right. The skills. But
we kind of have to, because we need a national airline.
But the skills between being the CEO and Prime Minister are very different. And one of the things you need as a Prime Minister is you need a level of consistency and empathy.
Yeah. I've always said, Shane, if someone wanted to take a skill set from outside of Parliament, outside of politics, and bring it in, maybe running a not-for-profit might be something similar, because then it's more about the service, and you have budgets and you have targets and you have staff, but it's not about the profit. Running a business is about the profit. Some people in the chat are asking, where's the Uffindale report? Which I think is interesting. Jeepers, party staff almost hit the security button. Free Soul says, come on, Jenna, say Uffindale, just say it. Look, a lot of people are saying this sort of thing. Uffindale, bed leg biff. So they're in there. I agree with you that there's not that much that Luxon can do. But we're going to play the second part of this report now. And what is obvious, much like I highlighted in my tweet, but Jenna Lynch does it much better with many more examples, is Luxon has set himself up a standard by criticising Labor.
Yeah.
He has said, Labor, you must do this, and then he hasn't done it himself. So let's watch the last 60 seconds of this with Jenna, because she goes through a few of the examples.
Jenna, so how's Luxon handled this?
His own standards have come back to bite him here.
Exactly.
When Michael Wood was under fire for failing to declare his shares, Luxon said that Wood should have been sacked on day one. Before any investigation took place, he called the Prime Minister weak for not doing so. Whereas in this case, Luxon has waited until he's been dealt a report with indefensible evidence in it before he's taken any action. These events took place over a month ago, and before referring it to Parliament's court, Labor tried to get National to act. I've seen the email chain between the two party whips, and granted, it does end with Labor saying thanks for looking into it, so Luxon may be forgiven for thinking that the matter was dealt with. That might stand as an excuse had he not created a rod for his own back in demanding instant sackings for bad behaviour from the Prime Minister. So now Christopher Luxon stands charged with hypocrisy with a capital H.
And I wonder, Shane, we've all seen it in the polls, so this is not a personal opinion. This is the kind of reason why New Zealanders don't trust Christopher Luxon. Like they're seeing evidence of him saying one thing and doing another. This is one of the reasons perhaps why his popularity as preferred Prime Minister is not going up. Yes, Hipkins is coming down, but he's stuck on between 15 and 20%. And everyone's kept saying, we don't know Luxon, we don't know Luxon. The other thing is they don't trust Luxon. All the polls say the same thing.
Actually, the more they get to know Luxon, the least they like him, which is very unusual for a leader of the opposition. And and you're quite right. Hipkins' numbers are coming down, but his numbers are not going up. And
not at all.
Yeah, not at all.
So, what do you think about the hypocrisy? I mean, like, politics is hypocrisy across the board. They say something and they do another. The thing that we always try and do on this show, Shane, as much as we can, is be consistent and call things consistently, be they a red team, a green team, a purple team, a blue team, or a yellow team, or whatever. And it seems that if you're going to go out and say, when there's an accusation, Labor, you must act, and then when there's an accusation against a National Party member, he doesn't act, what does that say about this person as a leader? What does that say about this person as a Prime Minister?
And really, in terms of the test of your personal integrity, this was quite a low bar. You know, he could have dealt with this very earlier on, and what he should have done is he should have said to Tim, "Come with me," walked across to Shannon Halbert's office and say, "Shannon, Tim's here to apologise." And I think Shannon would have shaken his hand, and they would have all moved on. All right. So I think that he lacks political instincts, that if he does become Prime Minister, will bite him in the bum. And part of that is when you lack political instincts, you tend to catch yourself out, and people view that as a level of hypocrisy.
Fumiko is saying, bring on the debates. There seems to be a vibe out there at the moment amongst some commentators that Hipkins is going to eat Luxon alive in the debates. I think even if that does happen, it might be too little, too late. But do you think the debates will make any difference?
No, I don't think so. I think most folks that watch debates have already made up their minds.
Sure,
they're already politically motivated. There's only one instance where I think it's led to an increase in votes, and it wasn't for the main protagonist. It was Peter Dunn when the worm turned.
The worm, absolutely.
You know, but the worm didn't live for long. It died a rather quick and painful death. No, I don't think so. And the other thing is that when things were looking desperate for the left, we thought that of John Key and Helen Clark, and it didn't work, and it didn't quite work out that way. But having said that, it will give for the first time head-to-head exposure between the two leaders, and will garnish a lot of attention as a result of that.
We're going to wrap up with a slightly sensitive topic. So we're going to be careful how we handle this.
We will be.
We talked a bit about this last night. Obviously, we're not going to talk about the case itself.
Right.
Former political figure pleads not guilty to child sex assault charges, and we talked a bit about this last night. And what we understand is, this has been mentioned in the House. Some things have been identified. We haven't said who it is. We're not going to say who it is. We're not going to say what was said in the House. But it's caused me to think, Shane, about things like name suppression, especially when it comes to an election cycle, and a couple of other things. Does name suppression hinder or help the democratic process when one of the people with name suppression is either political or is ancillary to the political world? And I think about a couple of examples. They're international examples. I think about when the FBI put that information out about Clinton's emails just before the election, and that changed some people's votes. Some people think that may well have helped Trump win that election. Now, that's not the name suppression, but it's like how ancillary information can impact who you're voting for. And then, of course, there was the Hunter Biden laptop situation. Now, if you hear people talk about that, 53% of Americans were made, that's bullshit. But there has been some research which does show there are some people, a small number of people, that may have changed their vote if they had have known more about the Hunter Biden laptop. Now, whether they're morons and they bought it, whatever, but the reality is, if that news had been out there, some people would have changed their vote. I don't even want to say there's some information out there at the moment, because I don't want to talk about that case, but if there is some information that's being withheld from the public for whatever reason, name suppression, the FBI is keeping it secret, it's someone saying, give me $1 million or I'll release it, whatever the reason is, what do you think about it being kept from the public leading up to the election? Is it something they should do or not? And what are your thoughts?
There is no good reason. Well, first of all, can I say this, that this case and this issue is sort of the worst kept secret since Sir James Wallace's name was suppressed. This is material. I don't want to go into it too much. I want to be very careful. This is material, and I cannot think what other than that there is election coming up. I could not think what the genuine public interest in this person's name being suppressed would possibly be.
Well, I think the judges actually said because that they didn't want it to, it might unfairly impact the election. I think that's been said in the court.
Yes, but for the judge to even take that into consideration, I think is a very dangerous precedent. Ought that not to be the decider of the voter, not of the court?
Yeah. And like we've talked about last night a little bit, what that also does is it makes all sorts of people go, well, who is it? Who is it? And then that actually accuses everybody in the political world. And I'm not saying politician, mind you, be very clear, people, in the political world, be they a commentator or a staffer or we're not saying anything about it, but in the political world, that means everyone in that world then has shadow cast upon them. I'm interested also, this is a bit of a byproduct about name suppression in general. I've sort of been of the opinion over my life that I think everyone should get name suppression until they're found guilty, and then no one should get it, because many people who don't get found guilty of a crime then have their lives ruined.
I get
names
that
in the media, but that's I don't know.
But also, if we think that justice is fair and equal, I think we're fooling ourselves. Sir James Wallace was able to get the level of suppression that he did for so long because he had lawyers. He could pay for them, and he could put up a legal argument, and he could stymie the legal process by appealing and going through using every economic privileges that he had.
Yep, and I think he's no longer Sir James, is he? Hasn't that just been stripped?
He's no longer Sir James. No, it was
Jim. Let's call him Jim. Sounds like a much better criminal's name. Let's call him Jim.
Right. Yes.
So in general, if it's something that could impact the voting process, you think it should be in the public domain?
Yeah, and I think the judge was wrong to suppress it on the basis that it might have a material impact on on the election outcome. That's up for you, me, and your tens of thousands of listeners, and every other person every other person or voting agent in Aotearoa to decide, because it is quite possible that all that light is shone upon what occurred here, and I think that a lot of people could well be very angry that they weren't given that information in a timely way.
Very interesting. All right, Shane. Hey, listen, we're always very careful here not to sort of, that apathy thing. That apathy thing is real, and I think people kind of, when they see the polls, sometimes it can both encourage them to vote, i.e., if they're getting close to 5%, my vote not be wasted. But if they're dropping in the polls, it can also disencourage people to vote as well. So we're always pretty careful not to go, it's all over.
I get that, Pat, but if you give people a reason to vote, they'll vote.
Yeah. So in saying all of that, how do you feel about the upcoming election? I mean, do you still think it's game on?
No, I am worried, and I lurch from one view to another, but those trend lines are not good. And I just don't see a suite of policies that are going to motivate people to turn out come October the 14th. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that things change over the next few weeks. But 5 weeks out is not that far away.
I like what you've just said about giving people a reason to vote. So for a long time, I've been of the opinion that you don't deserve my vote, you need to earn it. I think about, I've heard this in America a lot, like when Bernie Sanders went away and Hillary Clinton was the candidate, all these people who got disillusioned were like, they didn't vote for Hillary then, and then Trump won, and then the left all blamed the people who didn't vote for Hillary because they were disillusioned. It's like, no, Hillary needs to earn their vote. Hillary doesn't deserve their vote. They need to earn it. So I like thinking about it like, give them a reason to vote for us, and you will get their vote. So you don't have to play that game of you owe me. If you don't do it, the other side will get it and they're worse. You don't have to play that game if you put out their reasons to vote.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
Like it. All
right.
Hey, stay right there for a sec. We're just going to say thanks again. Thank you to all our people in the chat. We didn't get to a huge number of them. Lots of people want to thank you and say thanks for coming along. Thanks. Cool talk, Shane. All sorts of people who are in the chat saying that. Thanks again from Shane Choice. Want to say thanks again to our patrons. Love to have you on board. If you want to be a part of what we do, simply patreon.com/Big Hero News. If you've enjoyed the show tonight, there's a massive back catalogue on Apple and Spotify and Google Podcasts, as well as on the YouTube channel if that happens to be where you are watching us. That's us for this week, guys. We will see you Monday night from 9 p.m. for another edition of Big Hero News. Stay safe over the weekend. Remember, when you come back on Monday night, bring a friend. Thank you again, Shane. And we will catch the rest of you on Monday night from 9 p.m. Hooroo.
Thank you, folks.